Welcome, everybody, to the Loud and Drunk podcast. This is Dan. It's an election year, and like the Dolphins in December, there's one party out there that just always seems to blow it and lose my vote. The Libertarian Party. What is their problem, and what is the problem with libertarianism? But before we get started, loudanddrunk.com. That's our home base. Make sure that you go there to catch up on any podcasts. You can always find us there, loudanddrunk.com. So, Justin.
Oh, hi, I'm here. Yeah, libertarianism. There is a lot of attractive things about it, and there are also things that I can't wrap my head around how it would ever possibly work. But I'm so excited to talk about it.
I am Antonio Machiavelli. Very happy to be here. I don't really know much about libertarianism or what it is. I'm a little bit hazy on politics in general. I understand that it is a thing that exists, and it's how we choose people to tell us what to do. But either way, excited to have the conversation.
All right. Well, in order to talk about libertarianism, we really couldn't have Moses in on this conversation because he's just a little bit, he's not libertarian so much as he's just pure chaos incarnate.
He's an anarchist.
Yes. But instead,
I'm offended by that statement.
Yeah. But instead, we've got an anarcho-capitalist, Bonnie. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. You already doxed me, but I guess. Okay, so
I didn't say your last name. You're not doxed.
My name's Bonnie, and I am the resident anarchist in the house. So I'll be standing up for chaos and fireballs, it sounds like, for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Chaos and fireballs. Well, if there's one party that is completely in chaos, it's always the Libertarian Party. And, well, at least for the last 8 years or so, they have had an absolute layup to try and at least get into the debates and make a serious mark in presidential elections. 2016, layup. Everyone hates Trump. Everybody hates Hillary. Somehow Gary Johnson blows it. Doesn't know what Aleppo is. In 2020...
Rough.
Jo Jorgensen, just nobody even knew who the hell she was, despite the fact that Joe Biden doesn't even know who he is. And Donald Trump, again, not a lot of people liking him. So... libertarianism, in order to define essentially what the problem with the party is, and maybe what the problem with the ideology is, the first thing we should do is define it.
That was going to be my question, actually, for yourself, Bonnie. What is libertarianism, and who is Joe Biden? I've heard that name mentioned a few times.
Oh, Tony.
I'm not sure which one of those questions is easier to answer.
That's fair. Yeah, I've got all night. I'm drinking a whiskey right now.
As far as libertarianism, I think sometimes it can be difficult to define because it spans a spectrum, right? So you've got everything from people who believe in a small or limited government to people that fall all the way to my side, which follow it to its logical conclusion, which means that government is inherently immoral and that we shouldn't have a government at all. And so there are so many people that would define themselves. I mean, depending on the context, I might define myself as a libertarian, but not always. I certainly wouldn't call myself a big L libertarian, meaning like I'm not part of the National Party. I have no interest in who the candidate is this year, although I quite like Michael Rechtenwald for whatever that's worth. But it's hard to define, right? Because you're like talking about so many different people. It's just people that generally don't like the government, right? But we don't always agree on anything or, everything or anything.
Libertarians by nature are not great at agreeing and very much not good at organizing behind a particular candidate.
Which kind of lends itself to the idea that if you're opposed to government, then how would you organize behind a particular person to lead your theoretical government?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's quite the conundrum unto itself.
Yeah.
Like herding cats.
Yeah. I can't disagree with that. I know a little bit about cats. Who the hell is Joe Biden? We'll circle back to that. I don't want to get bogged down in that one.
We'll circle back to that. But a key point to kind of defining what libertarianism is, because you are right, there's a lot of factors to it. In a previous podcast, I defined myself as a classical liberal.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people get classical liberalism and libertarianism confused because they're both about limited government. They're about, sovereignty of the individual.
What's the difference?
The difference, the way I would describe the difference, is that the classical liberal believes in a limited government that actually has a purpose, where it's like the government is there to protect the rights of the individual, whereas the libertarian believes that the government is a corrupting factor and therefore just there should be no government practically.
Where do you believe your rights come from?
So a lot of people would say that rights come from God, or in my sense,
the
natural-born rights.
I would say that they're just inherent.
The listeners can't see, but my hand is up right now to the heavens, God above. Praise.
I would say that they're just natural, the way Justin described it. So libertarianism seems to go on this one principle of corporations being like, an entity that should be like unregulated. And to me, a corporation is as big a corrupting factor as government would be.
They're just like people because they are.
That's a really interesting argument. I have actually, I don't want to say I've never heard that, but as the anarchist in the crew, I run in slightly different circles. But a corporation only exists because of government. Without government, corporations wouldn't exist.
So I don't understand. It's a very fair point to bring up,
Mm-hmm.
and it needs to be discussed. I don't know if we got enough time to properly do that. But yes, because in libertarianism, it's such a wide, spectrum, I believe is the word you used before, and that you can fall in very narrow valleys within that spectrum. And it's incredibly tough because it's a lot about individual freedoms.
To get back to that other question, though,
Yes,
of like,
please.
what are the rights that you've got?
or where do they come from?
Where do they
Yes,
come from?
yeah.
Yeah. I think that the answer is kind of twofold and a little bit contradictory.
Sure.
In my personal observation, it's that and it was alluded to, there's the rights provided to you by nature.
Yeah.
Sure.
And those rights, as far as I observe it, is that you've got the right to be born. So you've gotten that far. And now all of a sudden you've got these rights. And those rights seem to only include your ability to defend yourself from murder. And nobody else provides that to you, maybe a parent figure or something like that. And then you've got rights that are provided to you by the society in which you live. So you've got some creatures on this planet that don't have a society, and their rights are incredibly limited. They're the rights that they afford themselves.
Well, all creatures have the ability to communicate in their own way.
Yeah,
so
I would
that's a
completely
natural
agree.
thing as well.
Yeah.
So you can defend yourself like birds.
Yeah.
Like
in other words, what I'm saying though is that there are no
I'm
rights.
amazed you brought up birds.
Yeah, well, birds communicate. I was going to use dolphins, but
It's weird because birds aren't even real, are they?
No, the government manufactures that. Let's get into that. That's a real conversation. I don't know much about Joe
We'll
Biden
push
or
that,
government.
and maybe we'll get to it later.
Oh my God!
Tell me you're on
robotic
Reddit
birds
without
everywhere.
telling me you're on Reddit.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that. I think that that's like a core thing, though, and I don't think that it's really. I don't think that it necessarily needs to sway the argument one way or the other. But I don't think that rights are like intrinsic. I don't think that people do have rights. I think that we create the concept of the rights that we have by virtue of the society that we have. Because the rights that I observe, not being a religious person, I don't see, rights being handed down by a deity or something like that. I don't think that people have the right to freedom or to live or to, a shirt on their back or something like that. Instead, I observe the rights that nature provides you, which is kind of like you were born, now fuck you. Do what you can. And I think that those are the rights that we intrinsically have. I think that the rights that we often talk about, and probably the rights that we would all agree that people should have, in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Those are the rights that we choose to provide to each other because we want them to provide it to
about,
ourselves.
like your natural born rights, because obviously nature doesn't give a fuck about you.
Yeah, so then that's what it is.
Right.
It's that you need to separate the rights that we believe are important from whatever your thing is above that. So if you believe in God, and you say that God gave us these rights, or if you believe the Constitution is something that's, like a deity, then that's where maybe your rights come from. But if you don't believe in that, as I do not, then I see what nature provides you, which is fuck all. And then I see what people provide to you, which is that, in this room or in the larger society in which we live, and I would argue most of humanity, then I would say that the rights that we think are valuable, that we should all have, are rights to some level of personal freedom, some level of property, whatever that may be, and so on and so forth. And you can extrapolate from there. But in other words, I think that that's important to really identify where that line is. What are the rights that you should have? Because that's really, whenever you're talking about
thus
ideal.
You stumble upon the biggest problem the Libertarian Party has.
Yeah, like who sets those levels? Who sets some level of personal freedom? Who
Well,
gets to
as a
decide where
fascist,
those-
I think I should set them.
said every government official ever.
Yeah.
Actually, they don't say that. I wish they did. It would be more honest.
Yeah.
libertarianism gets conflated with conservatism as well.
It does in some ways.
sure.
It gets conflated with a lot of different ideologies.
It gets conflated with classical liberalism,
It
but that
does.
makes sense because they're born of the same
they're
idea.
born of the same thing.
Yeah. But conservatism does not necessarily mean it's classical. Like the conservatives might be classically liberal now,
Right.
because that's the thing they want to preserve.
Well, it's the
But 50
flavor
years
that
ago,
They've
we're
also been
having.
pushed so far to
Yes,
that
yes,
side.
yeah.
Like the Overton window has moved.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's perhaps like a place where you could draw that difference right there, because the words are obviously used in like a fluid kind of way. So people conflate a libertarian with a conservative. These are words that certainly with conservative, that means a very specific thing in America that it doesn't mean in other places. So you got to look at that individual group. And when I look at conservatives in America, you see, like, for example, there's a push towards having religion. There's a very specific religious tinge to that. And it goes into like women's body rights and abortions and all sorts of things. And you don't see that same angle within libertarianism. It's a big difference between the two things.
No, you don't.
Am I correct in that, Bonnie?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
That's a fair statement.
I actually have a saying that no one's a libertarian until the government comes for what they want to happen, for their rights.
Yes,
because that's
100%.
When you brought up abortion, that's like, oh, yeah, keep your laws off my body. Well, when I wanted the laws off my fucking body, those women were nowhere to be found.
Right,
so.
right.
My body, my choice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it depends on the issue.
It reminds me of, it's a meme that I saw many years ago. I believe I shared it with you, Dan, but it says at the top, it goes, when I have food, and then it shows a picture of the person's dog.
Yeah.
And they're wearing like a communist like fucking hat with a hammer and sickle on it. And it goes, when they have food, and they're wearing like a trireme hat, and there's like a don't tread on me thing.
Gadsden flag.
So, I mean, I definitely agree that we find the politics that work for the exact moment, you know?
Oh, the whole Gadsden flag thing.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm not.
How could you like not like it? I'm wearing one right now on my hat.
True.
I always wear it. Hell,
I just assume that you buy them in bulk.
I do. And God damn it, if they're not made in America.
I don't have the heart to tell them.
It's just no, I'm not gonna go. I'm gonna move on.
That's fair.
No, I'm curious. I don't have a particular attachment to the flag, but what's the irony?
Oh, there's just a lot of history of what it actually comes from, and like how it's been taken and utilized by certain groups over the years, which is kind of hilarious.
Couldn't say that about many things.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely,
it's easier to
absolutely.
adopt something.
Yeah.
And it's the I mean, it goes back to that conversation about how libertarians will fight with themselves and so on and so forth.
It's our favorite.
But forming highly, specialized groups that believe that there's only one way to do it. And you could argue that that's like the American conservative landscape today. Certainly a big portion of the Republican Party is that way. Big portion of the Democrat Party is that way, where it's like, this is the only right way to do it. And we figured it out. Fucking Jesus wrote the Bible 6,000 years ago and there was nothing before that. And if you don't believe in it, then fuck you. And that's a particular like modus operandi that a lot of individual groups have had. But if you look at it within a broader, that political spectrum that we kind of like looked at a little bit a moment ago, then it's more or less just kind of a gray area where it is very flexible, I think. And it does vary based off of your circumstances.
There is a lot of gatekeeping within libertarianism. Like, oh, you're not, if you,
Oh, really?
yeah, if you want to
Go on.
have any sort of regulation, kind of like how I'd be like, all right, there should be some regulation in certain aspects because you can't trust a large corporation to do this, that, and the other thing. They're like, well, then fuck you.
Yeah,
You might as well
normie.
just be half a fascist.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
It's like the libertarians. All right, so you can be all about it. And like, yeah, the protection of the rights of the individual and property rights, it's an incredibly attractive thing to a person like me. Libertarianism attracts people that have a self-wherewithal and ability to do things and like look out for themselves. It's attractive to people like that.
I would agree that people who
Are
are
you saying there's no retards in the Libertarian Party? Am I allowed to say retard on this?
You are,
Oh, no,
you're
there's
allowed to
plenty.
say whatever
I
you
say
want.
it a lot.
said it.
I myself am a retard.
Thinking things doesn't make them true. But I'm getting mired in all the problems. All the problems are hitting me in my head right now because there are very attractive things about it. It's like, leave me alone. Let me do my own fucking thing at like a base level impetus. But there's so many other fucking things that are involved with that. That's why it's so wide. You can never get anybody unified on it in any way, shape, or form.
At base level, you've got, I think that it would be fair to say that, like, if you interview people in, like, downtown Manhattan, you're probably going to find very few people who identify in any way, shape, or form as being libertarian. And because, by definition, living in that particular locale, you are very much so, by choice, dependent upon so many different people for your survival. You know, you're living
urban centers are fucking impossible.
It's a highly urbanized area. If you look in a very rural area in the United States, you'll find presumably a lot more people who would lend themselves towards that. But that's where you enter into that gray area. And it's the conversation that I love to have with people because I'm a political chameleon. And so I'm happy to be a Marxist or a fascist or a whatever in a given moment. And people will say something like, oh, I don't believe in, government. That's bad. And I'm like, well, you took a road to get here. You know, what kind of like a Mad Max vehicle are you hypothetically taking?
That's a bit of a logical fallacy because you don't have have an option to take a road that is not a government road, right? So
Right,
we
of
haven't
course,
been
yeah.
provided with that as an option.
So the idea would be that private people would build roads because there would be some sort of
so we already have
yeah.
a road system, right? So
Yes.
it's very difficult for me to determine what a free market would look like with regards to roads,
I
right?
agree,
But like
yeah.
this is such a libertarian meme. Like, what about the roads, right?
No,
Like, this is
it's
like
one of their
every-
it's one of the
yes,
favorite.
it's literally
Yeah,
like, what
yeah.
about the roads? But the question of what would we do about the roads? Would they in fact be privatized? How would they be funded? Like, I don't feel like I have to come up with the answers to that question.
Right.
I'm female. I don't know anything about roads. Like, just by the very nature of the fact that I'm not male, I don't know how they're built. I don't know how to maintain them. I don't know anything about them. And it's not my job to. But I believe that the free market will provide that answer for me. better
And
than
the power of
government will,
prayer.
Because, yeah, obviously the power of prayer.
Obvious.
That's the only way that roads exist. But I don't think it's my job to come up with the answer, but I think someone will come up with a better answer than government because everything that government does inherently just makes things arguably worse. There are very few things that you can say, the government took this over and now, wow, it's doing so much better, right? So I would like to see what the free market can provide, and we have never, ever had that opportunity. So I don't even know what it could look like.
existed.
I would argue then, to take it in a different direction,
Yeah.
that rather than which one would be better or worse, that the natural progression of a free market is that it forms central structures.
Correct.
That
I
are
agree with that.
capable of high levels of organization by being monopolies.
Sure.
You know, because I mean, that's what the government is.
It's the biggest monopoly that
Yeah,
there
it's a
is.
monopoly on the usage of
100%.
violence. If you don't do ultimately what I told you to do, then you go to jail or,
Correct.
you know,
Come and lock you
there's
in the
real consequences.
100%.
And no one else can stand up to these consequences. So then it seems like free systems naturally form that, which I would argue that's a population growth thing, the size of your society. You don't have systems like this without tens or hundreds of millions of people.
Sure.
Certainly, if you look back when societies were not this big, they had totally different systems, some of which you could describe as being somewhat libertarian.
Sure.
You know,
In ways,
egalitarian
yes. In
certainly
ways, yeah.
existed before.
Yeah.
You had communistic societies
Yes.
before that word existed, so on and so forth. So it seems like the free market lends itself towards that. As far as how that happens, I'm not smart enough to describe, but, you know, as a layman looking at it, it seems like it's just the biggest player takes things over.
Well, it should be a meritocracy, right? It should be whoever does it
Should.
best.
Yeah. Should.
Right. But
Sure.
in a free market where someone is not creating the illusion that they have authority over you, because no one actually has authority over you. That's just something that we all believe. If we all just stopped listening right now, the
Systemically,
government
it's set
will
up
cease to
that way,
exist.
and it's perceived level of yes.
Well, then I'll bring myself back to my natural penchant to
Here we
fascism, which is that, so we all pave roads,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And one of us paves roads better than the other.
Sure.
Right? And I realize that I kind of suck at paving roads. But you know what I am really good at? Killing people. So
Oh.
I'm just going to go and hold a gun to whoever it is that builds the best roads. And then I get to be in charge of the government because you can't, or in charge of the entity which describes how the roads are built. In other words, that meritocracy, I completely agree with in theory, but it doesn't seem to exist in practice. And I presume that the reason is because if the best person for the best job naturally would rise to that occasion, best company, whatever you want to call it, then it seems like whoever it is that couldn't do it that well, they're good at the other thing, which is the usage of violence.
But if there wasn't a compulsory ruling class, then the best person would rise to the top because people were voluntarily choosing that is the person that they're going to follow, which is very different than saying that I have to pick a leader because a leader is imminent, right? Like we're going to have to pick one of these 2, 3, 7 parties. Forget about a 2-party system.
I agree in principle with what you're saying, that somebody will rise to the top, but not necessarily every single time will that person will be virtuous with what they do. There will be people that will just be like, let me cut every single corner. Now, you don't want to be associated with that because then that affects you in the market. But I have a clip that kind of goes to this whole conversation. And this has been, a little bit of a back to the libertarian ideology.
Sure.
This was Dave Rubin a few years ago. I think it was about 8 years ago on
Yeah.
the Joe Rogan podcast.
I actually remember it, and I haven't listened to Joe Rogan in the better part of a decade, so it has to be about that long ago.
So this is Dave Rubin on the podcast trying to make the point for libertarianism, and he can't get his way out of the paper bag.
We won't make you suffer too long.
Generally, what problem would everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all
the regulations like that for construction are important though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
But
make sure you don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of.
But I would put most of that on the builders though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not totally.
You go to third world countries and look at construction methods. They're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes. Like,
well, I'm not telling you that I'm against all regulation, period. That's
Okay.
that's where I said intellectually I like that argument because you could I think you can make a very sound argument that competition would force people to do better work. Like if you're a plumber, you have a vested interest in doing the best plumbing job you can so that people will rate you on Yelp so that you will get more work. You don't have a vested interest in cutting corners. Now you might, right? You're going to push it as much as you can to save as much time and energy and money as you can.
I feel like you just
go over that edge. Yeah, you don't want to be
bit.
known as the guy that you tightened something too much so that you flooded the house, or when you're building a house.
You're thinking logically though. When people fuck things up and short things and do things terrible, they're not thinking logically.
But
They're
I don't think it's
just
the government.
shitheads.
I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if
You know
they
what I
didn't
mean?
have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No, there
If they
would
knew
be an
that-
incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid.
Dan, if I may.
Fucking
Yeah.
It's an argument. I'm not a huge Joe Rogan fan, but I kind of do agree with what he's
I'm glad you cut it off when you did it because I was about to order some nootropics. I just felt it seeping back into me. Alpha brain.
Bonnie, what were your reactions to that?
So my argument is not that they would not cut corners because I feel that builders or plumbers or whoever is being regulated would cut corners. But my question is, are they cutting those corners? Does the government regulation in fact make it better? I believe that people will inherently do the things that are best for them. And if that means screwing over their fellow human being, they will do that.
Yes.
I have no argument there. I do not trust people implicitly, and then that's why I'm, an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah.
It's because I don't trust people. And so what is it about the government official coming in? Because anyone who's dealt with a government official, you know very well that they're not coming in because they have your best interest at heart, or because sometimes they just enjoy telling people what to do.
Yep.
Sometimes they enjoy getting bribes. Sometimes you'll find a good egg in there in the dozen, very rarely, who's just there because they want to help
it's
people.
there,
and
but
like
it's
their
cracked.
job.
Yeah.
Right. I at least gave it the benefit of a good egg, and my goodness, I'm the anarchist in the crew. So I do not think that, I think that the people that enforce and write these laws are inherently flawed. And so I don't think that those flawed people are any better than there is no utopia. There is no
there
libertarian
will never be utopia.
There will be rape, there will be murder,
Yes.
buildings will fall on children. Like these things are inherent, right?
Yeah.
So is adding government to the mix going to make that better? That's the question.
And it's the thing that I take away from that, the word that stands out with what you just said is the word better.
Right.
What does that mean to you? Because really what you're describing is, can someone with a draconian authority make things better? Well, now you need to define better. Is that better for the government, which wants for everything to be copacetic and you pay your taxes and no buildings ever collapse and this and that, and also they get all of your money and you have very little freedom and so on and so forth? Or is better that you get to make the decision about the electrician that you hire, right? And then you have the freedom to decide that. And maybe you spent a lot less money and you can do what you want with that money, but you've also taken the choice to live in a home where, maybe it was, wired by the guy down the street. You don't know if it's 100%, right? And that's your choice. And that's a decision that's very much so made for us in this government. You can get around it, but that's what it really comes down to. I think it's what is your definition of better? And some people have the definition of better as being, well, you need to be in it with the team, and other people have the idea of like, well, you can do what you want to do. And if you want some specialist to come in, be it from a government or whoever, and tell you the best way to wire up your house, and that's cool. But I don't care about that. And I want to wire up my own house. And if it burns down, that's my right, because I just want to hang out here in the woods and not talk to anybody. And that's my idea of better. So that's really, I think that's what it breaks down to. It's what's your idea of better?
And I would say if your idea of better is that teamwork, then you can have that, right, on a voluntary basis.
Yeah.
I have no issue with people coming together and building a community that they feel is best for them. It's when they force me to do it that is my problem, right?
Yeah.
So if I want to go live in the woods and collect rainwater and wire my own house, like, let me do that and be a free human being. And then you can have whatever society suits you, but don't force me to live within your system.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a question that's always kind of given me a bit of trouble. What happens with the non-contributors? So
The so-called free rider problem in socialism.
I mean, yes, that is part of that group that I'm talking about, but also say like you're elderly and stuff like that. How does that
we kill them all.
Yeah, we throw them off of the cliff. Obviously, everyone's very familiar with 500 BC Sparta. We take the elderly up to the top of a cliff and we observe them. And if they're, weak or feeble in some way,
I mean,
then,
Tony knows my love affair with Logan's Run, so I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Wow, what was it, 30, 33?
30,
What was
I think it was,
That's
the whole point. They run for office. You send all the old people to Washington, and that's how they contribute to society.
And it's like, for me, like, largely, like, I don't give a fuck about people I don't know. And that's just how I am.
It's a
But, like, I
practical way
give
to
a
view
fuck
things,
about, like, my parents.
Yeah.
So if, like, the change were happening tomorrow, I'd worry about my parents.
No.
But, like, it's not happening tomorrow. They can't get their shit together.
What would happen to your parents if, I don't know what the change is, but if a change happened tomorrow, what would you worry
I'd
for?
say, no, actually, my parents are actually a bad example because they've taken care of themselves. But,
Good for them.
Like, for
I'll take
people
that as a
that
win.
maybe played the gamble and they still have Social Security. So I operate under the understanding that no social services will exist when I get there.
They won't.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as they shouldn't, because you should have taken care of
Right.
yourself. Otherwise, you die in the street.
Right.
I feel like for me, the problem is exemplified when I have this conversation elsewhere. It's that I'll describe, because somebody will try and do like one of those I gotcha moments.
Yeah,
And they'll
yeah,
be like,
yeah.
What's your favorite? Like, what do you want it to look like? So they can be like, well, here's all the problems with that. And I give the same answer every single time, that if you ask me and, like, what do I want for me and my brother or the people in this room, let's say.
Sure.
Then I will say to you that I want some sort of
Able-bodied, capable people.
anarcho-capitalism of some sort. So I'd be right there in your vein, Monty. This concept of that we basically just like all have to take care of ourselves.
Right.
And I describe it in the full-on method of it, where I'm like, I'm perfectly happy to go and build myself a fucking cabin in the middle of nowhere, and I'll walk around with a revolver that I maintain myself. And if I see somebody else and they have a revolver too, then we'll have a shootout and maybe that's where I die. And that sounds like a badass life for me and for most of the people who are my age sitting in this room right now, my brother as well. But if you ask me what type of a government do I want for my elderly mother and my younger sister, it's probably one like this. It's like a little bit fascistic and looks out for white folk and old women, and she like lives in a neighborhood filled with cops. And I never need to worry about anybody who looks like me wandering in with a revolver looking to rob her or something like that.
Then wouldn't it be your responsibility to take care of your mother and your sister and not the government's?
Presumably so, but my mother is Jewish, so I do enjoy a little bit of space from her on occasion. So in this case, I'm willing to take the sacrifice of a little bit of government. It just gives me that little bit of breathing room,
I was actually thinking about this. I'd like your opinion on this thought process, Bonnie. So I do edibles to help me fall asleep. So I was up, I went to the weed store to try and get some more edibles so I could fall asleep, but they weren't open for recreational use. It was like, oh no, we're
only doing medicinal right
now. We
now.
only do medicinal at 10 a.m. Come back in an hour. And I'm like, what the hell is the difference between 10 a.m. and 11? Is that when all the riffraff are going to come by at 10 a.m.?
Well, it's the same thing for liquor.
Yes,
I
understand that. But
at least in New Jersey.
My thought process for weed in particular was, I don't want the regulation for it being open because that's stupid. That's a pointless regulation.
Yes.
But the regulation that I would want is that I don't want this weed, where the marijuana is coming from, to be to have come through any of the cartels.
Sure.
Because you don't know what they did to it. And
you don't want meth in your marijuana?
I don't want meth in my marijuana.
Speak for yourself.
It's a very small market share that wants that.
I don't want fentanyl in it. And I'm living my best life. I also don't want to be funding people who want, us dead.
Sure.
So that's that's my dichotomy there.
Sure.
I want the regulation because there's a lot of pointless regulation.
Well,
I know this for a fact because I was in the Navy. But then there's some. But then there's some all right, this regulation is appropriate because, or it should be ideal, because I have no idea if they actually fucking do that.
Right.
They probably don't, because this government likes to fucking fund the cartels. But ideally, I would rather us not fund our fucking enemies with our own tax dollars. In that
No argument there for me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you look at what the government puts in our water, when you do water testing and you see what's actually in our water, and I don't mean the things they put in our water that we might prefer that they don't, but they admit that they do.
Right.
I mean, the things that they would say, your water definitely doesn't include insert toxic chemical here. And then you do the water testing and there's tons of that chemical there. Why would I trust them to regulate my marijuana? Why?
That's a fair point.
It's a very fair point.
And not for nothing, to lend an argument in the opposite direction of kind of what I was saying before, that I've read a fair amount about, like even what the cartels themselves, like Mexican cartels who control those trades, they themselves have made public statements when things got like in the news and very heated about it. And they've like made the unusual point of doing like a press conference, essentially, something they're afforded with doing in Mexico, which is obviously a narco state. But they do a press conference and they go, listen, we're literally just trying to sell you pure methamphetamine. Americans are the ones who are adding fentanyl to this. We're also selling fentanyl, but we market it as fentanyl because it makes no difference to us whether it's sold as this or that. So in other words, and that lends itself to the concept of that the organization, in this case, the cartel is basically just a corporation. They lend themselves towards this idea of that we do want to maintain our consumer base. We don't want too many problems. We're in this business to make money. You know, we're not in it for like, twirling our mustaches, tying up young white women to a railroad track.
And they don't want to kill their customer base.
Exactly.
They want you addicted, not dead.
Exactly. So they
it's
do
your
make a
street
point.
scum that are fucking your mid-level
Or China, arguably.
Well,
like
China,
I've heard the argument that China
and all for
is pumping
different
fentanyl to
exactly, and all for different reasons, because you've got people who really like are hungry for that extra buck, but it's not the cartels that are making billions of dollars. They don't need to squeeze an extra $5
I think
by adulterating your shit.
Well,
with
I understand
fentanyl.
what you're saying. The thesis of my point still is valid. If you're going to have regulation for something so stupid as when the store opens, you should have regulation. We're not currently funding our enemies.
This is the swamp of nonsense that has to be traversed. There's a simple yet very hard question for a lot of people. Do you want freedom or do you want security?
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
So that's been the balance for forever.
And like, you got to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah.
And
they don't even provide security, by the way, because it's the question
Well,
is
it's the illusion of
Right, it's the illusion of security.
Go to an
security
airport.
theater.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree with that. The fundamental question is choosing between those two things, which I would argue no human being can do completely.
No.
As I use the example
It's
of like
messy.
myself versus my mother.
It's not a simple question.
Yeah. I want this like borderline total freedom. And for my mother, I want just the amount of freedom that makes her feel comfortable, just enough, So for myself, even, I enter into this realm of hypocrisy. And so I think that that's the first thing that anybody can do is just acknowledge that your views are not necessarily going to be congruous with themselves, just like in their entirety. It's just how it is. At the same time, though, the government acting as a regulator, I think, and I believe I'm in good company, does the worst job.
Correct.
Of trying to strike that balance.
100%.
The balance
Government
is impossible
is not
to hit.
for you.
They
Government
miss it
is for
totally.
government.
Yeah.
You said you weren't going to get loud on this podcast.
Its value is to
It's the
protect
whiskey.
itself, not protect you.
Speaking of government,
Oh, boy.
when the I mentioned this at the top of the show. The Libertarians are the Miami Dolphins of fucking political parties because they always.
I still agree.
In 2016, Gary Johnson ran,
Yeah.
and he was like, that was supposed to be the big moment for the Libertarian Party. Like, you had notable, like, fucking celebrities even saying, like, I'm probably going to vote for Gary Johnson.
Because he was milquetoast and
Yeah, he was milquetoast. But he also, there was a number of things. It wasn't the reason why I didn't vote for him. But he had that Aleppo gaffe, which is funny to me because the people asking him the question probably didn't know what the fuck Aleppo was.
Nope.
Most Americans don't know what the fuck Aleppo
I'm sorry, I'm
was.
going to say something really fast because it annoys me, but in 2012, they couldn't even decide what to do with driver's licenses.
Yep.
So they couldn't even make a decision on that.
The reason I didn't vote for Gary Johnson in 2016 is because I'm not a single issue voter.
Right.
But there are like major issues. Like there's key issues where I'm
Sure,
like, if
of
you
course,
cross
of
this
course,
line, you're out.
Yeah.
For that year, it was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was written by a lot of companies like, Comcast.
I was going to say menthol cigarettes, but that's fair enough.
That's later.
They
If we get
pulled
into
that
the
back
deep
today,
depths,
by the way.
Yeah.
That's another conversation, I guess.
There's a racial joke here. I'm not gonna say it. I'm just gonna.
But essentially,
I'll tell it later.
essentially what that was, it was like a global trade pact.
Yes.
There was also a lot of censorship attached to it. It was going to control like internet providers and things of that nature. And at that point, I was like, I'm not doing this. I even wrote like a fucking essay about why I'm not going to fucking vote for anybody that supports this fucking thing. So that's why he lost my vote. In 2020, it was Jo Jorgensen.
Right.
Now, I didn't do a whole lot of research on her. I did see a tweet from her that was essentially like, it was all Black Lives Matter, all the woke talking points. And I'm like, how are you a libertarian? Actually, to both of them, how are you a libertarian when you're for a global authoritarian, pact? And how are you a libertarian when you're for a social authoritarian?
It has no real identity.
It doesn't. But you can't be those things. The one thing. Like, I'm not a libertarian gatekeeper by any stretch of the imagination, but the one thing you can't to be a libertarian is authoritarian. That's the opposite of it.
Correct.
So that's a long way of me essentially introducing this.
And what we've seen the so-called Libertarian Party show, it's fucking wildly embarrassing. And it's like libertarian, like I said, there's ideals that I like, but like as a whole, it's not a fucking thing. It can't figure itself out.
Because it's too chaotic.
Yeah.
And so, Bonnie, what was your impression of Gary Johnson?
So I have to be honest, I don't pay too terribly much attention to the big O Libertarian Party because I inherently believe that voting is violence, because I don't believe that.
I so agree.
Sorry, guys, we took it all the way around. You got so liberal. You're like, I'm going to call in my libertarian friend. It's like,
as a fascist, voting offense. Go on.
Because I don't believe that I have the right to choose who rules over you, right? I can vote for a ruler for me, but inherently voting the way it's set up in this country means that I'm choosing a ruler for everyone within a geographic area.
True.
And I don't believe that I have the right to choose who rules that geographic area. So voting to me is inherently violent, so I don't vote. But setting that aside, I think Gary Johnson and Jo Jorgensen, other than the fact that she drank bourbon, that was like the only thing about her that I thought was remotely interesting.
She's got my vote
any
now.
chick
I
that
didn't know
drinks
that.
bourbon neat, I'm like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
But other than that, they were both incredibly milquetoast. Like, I'm actually interested now. So from what I understand, and again, I don't follow big L libertarian super closely, but from what I understand, they haven't picked a candidate yet. But I quite like Michael Rectenwald because he's an anarcho-capitalist, of course. So I'm tribal in that way. But he is, he seems to be a very principled libertarian. There's what we call the Mises Caucus in the libertarian movement, which is, the Me Caucus. I would certainly call myself, if I had to associate with a tribe, that's the tribe I would associate with. And it could be interesting, right? Because I'm hoping somebody gets on stage this year in some sort of debate and says, legalize recreational nuclear weapons, because that's a debate I want to have, right? And I'm not saying that to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, to draw attention. Like, I literally mean, like, let's not talk about legalizing marijuana. Let's talk about ending the drug war.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Let's not talk about lowering the tax rate. Let's talk about taxation as theft. Like, let's talk about these things for what they are. And we're not going to win because any good libertarian shouldn't want to be.
If you can even get on the stage.
I'm from Jersey. I'm using my hands and I just hit the microphone.
The problem is that, like, you can't even get on stage in a mainstream level.
No. It's a two-party system.
It's a two-party system. And I think we discussed this on the podcast at one point before.
We did.
The jury rigged it so much after Ross Perot.
Oh, after Ross Perot. It was like,
this isn't going to work. We need them to pick from these particular two piles of shit.
Exactly right.
But that's why in 2016 it was such a whiff, because that should have been the year. It's like nobody likes Hillary Clinton and nobody liked Donald Trump in that election. Yet somehow 100%. Gary Johnson just threw that pick six and couldn't fucking get onto the fucking debate stage.
But if it wasn't Aleppo, it would have been something else.
Yes.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
But it's also libertarians usually their strong point isn't foreign affairs. It's mostly domestic.
Yeah, because foreign affairs is like, why the fuck is that my business?
Yeah, why are we even doing this?
It's not a good selling point.
And this is my jaded view of American politics. Yes. If you've got somebody who's good enough that they can truly stand on that stage, on the national forum, as representing the Libertarian Party, if they're that good and they've got a chance at all, then they're going to run for the Republican Party. Yeah. That's what it is.
And that's what Ron Paul did.
Yeah, exactly. It's because it is a two-party system. And the bottom line is that no matter what your party is, and even though libertarianism might not necessarily have this broad concept of endorsing, the central government and so on and so forth, the bottom line is that it is a political party. You need a central leader, and there is a central leader, and that person is going to be somebody who wants to be the center of attention, and they're going to be something like all of the other politicians.
And it's already bought.
Yeah, and they're going to be drawn towards the idea of winning. And so really, like, running as a third party in this country is running for something that you have already lost. Yeah. So 100%. If you've got a chance, if you think that you're fucking anybody, then you go for the Republican nomination.
Yep.
And that's what it is.
I would say, though, that is a good thing that more libertarians are going into the Republican Party, because it's making the conservative movement more libertarian. And you want more. Because
why is that good?
I would say that's good because conservatism is normally to maintain the status quo of being authoritarian. And And if you make that more libertarian, then you'll be
I see the opposite, though, because it's like the Freedom Caucus is like basically what I endorse, just like neo-fascism, which I'm 100% about.
That's
because
not the libertarian.
Nobody deserves rights. And the Freedom Caucus is kind of about that. And I'm way into it.
Oh, I love it when Tony comes on.
Women are breeders. and everybody who's not a white man is obviously, they should be, doing the work that we need to be done. And we can be polite about it. That's about as woke as I get. Yeah. Well, listen, Dan.
Does that mean I get to quit my job and stay home?
You can do whatever you want in my eyes as a libertarian.
Sign me up, baby. Oh, my God.
I feel like things like the Freedom Caucus and like the general way in which Trump like dominates the Republican Party now. And I think that he's like a political chameleon. He can kind of do whatever it is that he thinks people want to see. But he's obviously very, he's got a nationalistic tint to him, which I think people do like. There's an isolationist tint. Some of these things very much so vibe with the concepts of libertarianism. But then there's very much so like other things that come down to your personal, whatever we want to call it, your personal rights, personal freedoms.
I'm so adverse to the cult of personality.
Yeah.
And it just drives me insane because it's such a big playing part.
Just give me Mussolini. I feel like that. He would I know that Trump has got the hair and everything. He
needs a scooter.
He does need a
little scoot.
He does need a scooter. I'm just saying, some people were better speakers in history, and if we could just bring them back as like a head in a jar, and maybe they lead this country into some sort of like a World War III, I'm into it.
I don't think we need someone to lead us into World War III. Don't worry, we're headed there.
I guess I'll just sit back.
As a collective, we're just stomping right towards it. There's too many of us. We can't handle it.
I support these ideas. I think we're heading in the right direction. The kids will be soldiers, and I'll be an old man in my armchair telling them to go and fight harder.
Are you just describing African governments now?
Yeah, I think so. That's where we're headed, right? Yeah.
Oh man!
When I was crossing the land border from Tanzania into Malawi, they asked me. So when you cross a land border, they ask you what country you're from, and you have to fill out a form. You have to write a little form, and it says, "What country are you from?" Unless you are stateless, in which case declare yourself stateless.
Right,
and I asked the guide I was with, I'm like, "Can I say I'm stateless?" They're like, "No, you're not fucking stateless."
You're fucking
but
white.
I want to be stateless. I very much want to be stateless. Yeah. Do you understand my politics? He's like, "No, and I don't care. You write down you're from the United States of America."
Yeah. You know what happens to stateless people here?
We're in Tanzania.
If you want to do what you want to do against your sentimentalities, fuck you.
Speaking of sentimentalities, we hinted at this during your wedding episode of marriage.
Oh, yes.
And, I promised that we would get to it.
I'm like, what did we say in that episode?
Oh, man, it's all coming back.
My most libertarian belief is that government has absolutely no place outside of perhaps telling people you can't marry a child or a dog or something like that. But
we'll circle back to that because I've got some different opinions.
Well, there you go.
Of course he does.
All right, Tony.
Good old Tony.
But it has no place within marriage. In fact, gay people were arguing the wrong point. It's not that we have the right to be married. It's actually, no, the straight people, they probably should not have the government involved in marriage because marriage is just a three-way between you, your partner, and the government.
It's inherently wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
No, I could not agree more.
Me and myself and I was being facetious before, but myself and Roscoe, my dog, we've had this conversation a few times, and I agree. There's really no place for it. If a man loves a dog or whatever their situation might happen to be, foreign as it is to myself, that is very much so deeply personal to those individuals, and the government has no business.
The dog can't consent.
Oh, I forgot your cousin was Mr. Hands.
Yeah. Well, listen, first of all, that was private conversation, Justin. So thank you for doxing me out on that one. And Dan, my dog consents all the time. And that's a conversation that we will have another time.
Boy, oh boy.
I'm glad we're about 45 minutes into this episode because, YouTube, if they got a whiff of that sentence, they'd just be like, nope, pulling the plug.
Thank God it's just an AI and they won't get the subtleties of that joke.
Lakeside.
But with that said, you probably go down a further path than I do, Bonnie, because as I was saying before we started recording, on the anarcho-capitalist highway, I got off a few exits before you did.
Yes.
So what would be your?
I took it all the way to the end, all the way to exit 0. Yeah, for
exit.
sure. To be fair, I didn't start there. It's not like I grew up in a very libertarian family, and then I started listening to Tom Woods and Larkin Rose, and I started following these things, as I'll say, to their natural conclusion, which is if government is inherently immoral, why do we have one? And why do human beings have the authority to rule over other human beings? And all government is a grouping of human beings, and so that's it. But as far as my most libertarian belief, I already said voting is violence and legalize recreational nuclear weapons. So I don't know where to go from here, if I'm honest. But that's a tough one to follow. But I would say all human beings have the right to be free in every regard. Whatever you want to do in your life, you should have a right to be free, as long as you are not hurting other people and taking their stuff. Which is not as inflammatory as the other two statements, but I already made them, so I can't make them again. Right?
All right. So Tony, you can't be hurting your dog.
I'm not
can your
hurting
dog
the
consent?
dog.
That
It's
is
a
the question.
mutual romance, and there's a lot of heavy petting.
How do you know it's mutual, sir?
Because we have conversations. I speak a little bark.
You.
Well, without Moses here, somebody has to do it.
So you have to be the agent of chaos then?
I completely agree with that, though, in a genuine sense. I do think that's, first of all, it's how I feel, very much so, that if you're not hurting somebody else, which in itself, there's questions there, because people will say things like, you doing this hurts me in some way. Now, those arguments I often don't find hold a lot of water. You've got people, like, to give an example, be like, if you're, having a homosexual relationship, that's harming my concepts and it's harming God and whatnot. So you've got beliefs that supersede for those people.
For those people, they have moral structures beyond.
Right. And in those cases, me personally, and this is why it's such a gray area for me personally, I'm basically more than happy to say, well, you believe in God, and I personally don't believe in that God.
So that brings up actually a fun I actually don't mean it's fun, but like a point of like actual conjecture. So like the freedoms of, say, like your neighbor fully believes, like that's their freedom to believe that they should fuck all their children.
Yeah.
To bring on the next,
exactly.
Messiah
Yeah.
These
are
I'm really glad
things,
we're deep in this episode.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
We're going to get to fucking
What do we
children
got, 15
eventually.
minutes left?
Yeah.
Pull the plug.
But what I would say, even beyond that, though, and I love that you have that.
That surprised me in a way I was not prepared for.
Even before you get to these individual charged accounts that we can individually make, there's the other aspect of it of what should we be able to do? Because I think, like, if you just say that at base, like, everybody should have the freedom to do the things that they want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. I think most people would agree with that. And then they would give their, but what if kind of scenario. But even before you get to that moment, there is the fundamental that, one, observably, that's not what people do.
Right.
So we're talking about a hypothetical of like, what if people were perfect?
Yeah.
Right. And then to add on to it, it's that really what that represents to me, that people are that way, is that because we live in this highly organized social structure, people, and I mean people, like as a group, not individual people, but everybody, demand to some degree or another that you conform to what they think this group and this world should look like. So, and you could use that as like like I have no problem with somebody, banging somebody of the same sex, marrying somebody of the same sex. That's not a problem. Yeah. But like if you're like, fucking goats, and the goats aren't consenting, at a certain point, I gotta,
Are they
like,
pushing back?
I gotta,
Are they pushing back?
in a good way or a bad way, because I mean, you want a little pushback. Otherwise, what are we even doing here?
You got to think of the goats.
Yeah, you
got
got
to
think
welfare
of the goats. Yeah. If they're not pushing back, then
I went
you're
to
not
London
doing
once,
it right.
and it is what they told me.
But that there is, like, we do draw these very hard lines, and you could there's a million ways to make the argument. I could say something very simply like, hypothetically, we live in a very conservative area, right? And I'm in a heterosexual relationship, and you're gay, and I have no problem with that. But the people in the other neighborhood, they want to create violence for gays. And so I don't like that you're doing this right next to me. So I want you to go because I want to protect me and my own, right? So who's wrong now? Because
it doesn't matter who's wrong. If you have private property, they can do whatever they want. And then the gays should fucking arm themselves.
I see. So therein lies the answer. And I think that, and I completely agree with that, because naturally I do very much so believe in anarchy or fascism. I could go either way with it. But I think that
Slippery boy, this Tony.
Yeah,
is a human dichotomy. I don't know how to conversate with him.
But there's an inherent, there's a duality to it, that there's always going to be this contradiction. And that goes back to, and this is my general perspective on it, that this is humans being humans. It's why none of these political systems work. It's even though we can describe this concept of libertarianism and its many variants as being superior to the system that we have, and I personally would agree that any version of libertarianism is better than what we have in this country right now, it's intrinsically flawed in that it's not lining up with the way in which people actually behave.
But humans are flawed, so it's always...
That's what I mean.
There is no utopia.
They descend
There is no
into
perfection. There is no utopia. It is...
People will always fuck children.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah. My dog consents, by the way.
And also, you won't fix.
I didn't see the red light, Dan.
Bonnie is never coming back on the podcast.
You're not the first person to say that.
Welcome to the Loud and Canceled podcast.
I am that meme. I don't remember what his name is, but I'm just perspiring. It's just all water right now. I have to edit this.
Yeah.
We better go an extra 5 minutes.
Yeah, Dan's shirt is soaked right now. And I'm pretty sure there's uniformed people waiting outside the window.
Yeah, if y'all weren't on a government watch list before.
Yeah.
Well, if we're on the government watch list, you know what we need to sign up for? The Free State Project.
Oh.
And Bonnie, before we started recording, you said like, oh, I'm all about this. So I would actually like to ask you, like, because I did kind of look into it, but,
Sure.
you know, since you're a subject matter expert on the deal.
I'm also
I don't know.
novice myself in what I understand.
I don't know about expert, but I am a signer for the Free State Project.
Okay.
So I started getting involved with the Free State Project in, oh my God, I don't know, the early aughts, whatever that is.
Okay.
And I went to the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which is a festival, camping, libertarian, again, small L, libertarian, very loosely, camping festival up in New Hampshire. And then I went to Liberty Forum, which is another event hosted by the Free State Project. And I really fell in love with the idea of, well, if we can't free everyone, right? Because not everyone wants to be free. And that's actually totally cool. So if you want to have a ruling class, I think that's awesome for you if that's what makes you happy. I wish you wanted freedom, but I'm not going to force that upon you because I don't believe in force. Right?
It's like that question, security or freedom.
Correct. Yeah. I choose freedom. Yeah. And so a lot of people got together and decided, well, actually not a lot of people. I mean, Jason Sorens created the thesis that if enough people moved to one low population state, that they would be able to create that life of freedom for themselves. And so they put some states on a ballot. This is before my time. And they voted on which state would be the most appropriate. New Hampshire was chosen because of its small population. It has a larger than average median income, and it has a port. So the ability to have it has an international border.
It has like the necessary infrastructure.
Correct, to create its own country. Yeah. And so after going to a number of these events and talking to a lot of other people that I shared ideals with in these areas, I decided to sign for the Free State Project, which means that you agree to move to New Hampshire and then create this create a freer world, if you will, within this geographic space. I moved to New Hampshire for all of about fucking 6 weeks, and my personal life imploded, and I had to move back to New Jersey, because New Jersey is like the abusive relationship I can't get out of.
It's the one we know.
Oh, dude, I can't get away.
Baby.
It's like a man that hits you, but he also pays your bills, so you don't know what to do. It's like, I have a Louis Vuitton bag, but occasionally I have a black eye. That's how I feel about New Jersey. So I can't get away. So I moved back to New Jersey, but I really love what the Free State Project is doing. They've made a tremendous amount of progress in that area. There's a bunch of massholes that are moving into New Hampshire as well.
Of course,
because ironically, they love their fucking politics, but then they bring it with them. They're like, there's no taxes up here.
I can
have my guns up here.
Yeah.
And then they bring all their politics with them, and they're fucking ruining the state. But that's a whole nother conversation. But the Free State Project is absolutely amazing. And I think if we could get enough libertarians, small L, together because realistically, we don't need to overthrow the government. We just need to ignore them. If everyone stopped paying their taxes tomorrow, what the fuck are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to come to all of our houses with guns and lock us all in cages?
They're not going to arrest all of you.
Yeah.
Correct. They can't. So if you get enough people together, what are they going to do? And so that's the ideal of the Free State Project. I didn't maybe explain that super eloquently.
I don't know like the long and short of it, the history or anything like that. I like the impetus of it because it is literally like, what are you going to do? Arrest this whole community?
There's 10,000 of us.
Right.
Go ahead. Come at me.
Right.
And the nice thing about the Free State Project is you're surrounded by libertarians. So I have a lot of friends up there. I will not speak any more about it. That live completely outside of the system. They function on cryptocurrency, gold and silver, and other forms of barter. And they live entirely out of the system. They have children, and they don't give them social security numbers, and nobody is the wiser. And because they're surrounded by a like-minded community that's willing to provide them with food and shelter and like people who get it, then they can live this lifestyle that like in New Jersey, we're just never going to have. and whether that lifestyle is for you or not is a whole other question.
That is a thing unto itself. I appreciate that it exists. I absolutely, because I love that. It's just logistically.
Says the government employee.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Says the guy with a pension.
Maybe.
We all got to
see
make
what
our money where we
happens.
can.
I don't expect that to last.
I've largely from yourself, Lonnie, I've read a fair amount about it. Certainly no expert. I know that I believe it was the governor of New Hampshire, spoke out against it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, as like almost like describing it as like invaders.
Oh, yes.
And it was so, I don't know if ironic is the word, but she was basically like, we can't stop them, but what we can do is make the laws so draconian against them. And I was like, wow, this really feeds so far into exactly the concerns that people have, including the people who already lived in New Hampshire.
Correct.
Obviously, it's what made it so
pre-staters. We like to call them pre-staters.
There you go. I'm way about it. I think that I mean, ultimately, I believe in a world where people form groups that are probably smaller than the group that we identify with, which is, Americans. I think that 320 million plus people all trying to agree on specific things, it seems very lofty to me. And I love the idea that I can go, I can meet somebody from California when I happen to be in another country, and they're like, oh, I'm an American too. And that's very neat. That's cool. It's nice to have.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it doesn't mean fucking shit. And so I
don't even have the same fast food chains.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they do it wrong out there with their fucking, what is that?
True.
I forget what the fuck that name is.
In-N-Out Burger?
In-N-Out Burger, yeah. Fuck those people. And here we see it displayed. It doesn't really mean too much of anything. I think that forming smaller groups is more meaningful because I don't think that necessarily the structure goes away, but I think that when the group is smaller, you're able to be more in line with what everybody in the group actually wants.
There's a hard level of indoctrination into this system. Yeah. It's like you don't even realize it.
In my own family.
This is the way it is. This is the way it should be. Blah, 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 blah. It's what you know, so it's what you fucking do.
There's so many opinions within my own family. Needless to say, my circle of friends, here we sit. Yeah. The idea that there's 320 million people in this country, and just because we call ourselves Americans means that we should agree on everything. There's people who are raising fucking cattle in fucking Texas right now who are wandering around with shotguns. And then, we've got a buddy who's living in fucking Manhattan.
I can barely tolerate the fucking 100 people I pretend to know.
Yeah, I just don't see how that's like a tenable
Our brains
thing.
aren't actually equipped to handle it. I forget exactly.
I bring it up all the time. It's the Dunbar's number.
It's the Dunbar's number.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's and the bottom line is that so amidst this chaos where we all agree that the guy from Manhattan and the guy from Texas probably have very little in common with each other other than the name American. And so it's like, how do we solve this problem? Oh, I know. We elect an 80-year-old white man who's a millionaire or billionaire, and he's going to guide us out of this. That's obviously not the solution, and I think everybody knows this. That said, as far as the Free State Project goes, I would love to be a warlord there. And if the opportunity presents itself, I know that everybody's well armed, which could go either way for me.
New Hampshire has more machine guns per capita than any other state in the union, so I say good luck, sir.
That's fair enough, yeah. I like to think I have the gift of gab. Also, I drink a lot, so if it goes wrong for me, I probably won't know.
It is very much.
You don't need to mark my grave either. I'm fine with that. I lived free and I'll die free.
Here for a good time, not a long time.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is such an interesting argument because, like I said, there are so many things about it that are so truly captivating to me. It's like, oh, I fucking wish. I so fucking wish. But you can't, as a whole, it'll never happen.
No.
Why?
I just don't. I think too many people give in to security over freedom.
But what if you got the people that did choose freedom over security together within a certain landmass?
Well, I think that's what I'm saying.
Then that would be the group.
That would be the group. I'm just saying as the whole is what we understand our current.
Oh, like the United States of America?
Yes.
And the comicality of it is that, and this is just me completely speculating, but also based off of my observation of just human history, it's that if you do hypothetically get this group together where they're like, we've got this idea, of freedom for the individual, whatever you want to paint it as. Basically, the conversation we just had, we all got together and we're going to do this thing here and we're not trying to fuck with anybody else. The next door people, Ohio or whoever, Vermont is going to team up with
Ohio.
Whatever other bumblefuck states are over there. They're going to team up with them and be like, you know what? Your type of freedom is wrong, and we've got the better one. And now we have to fight a war over it.
Well, now we need to have the bigger guns.
Well, exactly. See, and this is why I want to be a warlord. I feel like I just lend myself to it. Yeah.
I feel like an arms dealer would probably be more profitable than
it'd be
warlord,
I would like
but,
that. It'd be more profitable, but like one day I'd like to wear a cape, and I don't think I can do that as an arms dealer. But a warlord, maybe. I could have like the cool epaulets and shit.
Or a Lord of War?
I'll take God damn it. I never wanted to like analogize myself.
Do you want to be Yuri or do you want to be Idi Amin?
I don't want to like compare myself to Nick Cage because I'm always going to be the smaller man in that. I'm ashamed to say.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to go so far.
No, it is what it is.
I think one of the points that you guys were making before, though, in terms of people seeking the security of the state, I think that was one of the biggest lessons from 2020 and 2021 is that people will inevitably cave in to any sort of government pressure.
Yeah.
Because think of the amount of people that were just like, oh, I'll just do what they say. Just leave me alone if I do it. And they're never going to leave you alone. So the number of people to have the Free State Project, it might be necessary just to take over New Hampshire, but in order to make any sort of progress with the country in mass,
forget it.
It would never happen.
It would never.
It's not
Because
possible.
too many people had already shown us in this little subset of data in those 2 years
For sure.
that they just will totally cave.
100%. There is no chance for the United States. But the United States of America doesn't have a right to exist.
I'm just saying, though, like Trump, he's going to be dead in a few years, his natural causes, let's say. And that's the perfect time for a warlord to slip in.
Now you're talking
and
about
cultivate that cult of personality.
But yet, if they keep pumping Biden, he'll live forever.
Oh, my God. He's
Whatever
probably got
drugs they're
20 more
giving
years.
him. I just want a tenth of it.
Yeah, they just shoot them up with whatever, like Coke and
Right. Whatever it is, it sounds lovely.
It's some sort of
My dealer doesn't have access to
nonstop
it.
Probably
Chris.
living his best life. I hate to
That
say
brain's
it, but-
been dead for 30 years.
Yeah, he reads he's like Ron Burgundy now. He just reads whatever's on the teleprompter.
But it's like
Go fuck yourselves, America.
Now. But everybody forgets how 35 years ago he was just blatantly ripping off JFK speeches.
Yeah.
Even before he had the cognitive decline, he was openly lying about what his son did in Afghan. Over no, dude, your son was a jag. And you keep talking about him.
That's why I feel I've got a chance, because one day somebody's going to be like, this guy was on the Loud and Drunk podcast and he was wasted all the time. And I'll be like, that's bullshit. It's fake news. And my son was a war hero.
Listen, if it ever comes to a measure of skeletons in one's closet, I might have a chance someday. Fucking hell.
You're going to be my right-hand man.
Hey.
It's going to be suicide together, friends.
Yes. Beautiful.
Sometime in 2035. That's a solid run.
Wow, that's aggressive, but okay.
We've got 9 years.
Better start getting that campaign going then.
Yeah. Well, we're working on it. How many listeners do we have?
7, I think.
Not enough. Not enough to run a
2045. We'll do better than Hitler then.
Okay.
Got to take what we can get.
that name now.
Oh, damn it. Does YouTube not like that?
No, it doesn't.
I thought we were talking about fascism.
We're talking about fascism. We're talking about, I don't know, diddling kids at one point.
Fair enough.
Oh, you went back there. I was going to let it go.
I'm glad that I went with Antonio instead of Benito then.
We're over an hour in. They're not listening anymore.
That's all I got.
Obviously, Bonnie, so glad you're here because you have an actual nuanced idea. You've thought about these things fully through to legitimate concerns of how about your life and the world around us and everything like that. These things for me are I'm very kind of just apathetic. Whatever, I'll die eventually, I guess.
Yeah.
And whatever.
It all evens itself out in the end.
But I appreciate it. And I like especially the thought process because obviously my ultimate opinion is we here have allowed the government to get so bloated and fat and too big that it controls way too much and regulates too much of our fucking lives. But I cannot put myself in a way to actually see the end of it in my own time.
But I would argue that governments inherently do that.
I think
Any
it's
government, and
their
this is why
nature.
this was the jump from minarchist to anarchist. For me,
Yeah.
is that any government is inherently immoral and is going to grow like a stone rolling downhill. It's going to gather moss, right? And so it's going to grow and it's going to become a problem. And therefore, the only way that we can live in human freedom is to pull it out by the root. And I don't know what that's going to look like. We're going to still have rape. We're still going to have murder. And for the sake of YouTube, we're still going to have people diddling kids.
It doesn't solve all problems. It doesn't make a utopia.
Absolutely not. But it does remove so many problems.
Yeah.
Like all of those things are still going to exist, but they're not going to take 50% of my income. They're not going to lock me in a cage for engaging in whatever behavior that I find good for me that they don't find good for me.
As a proper libertarian warlord, I can guarantee you that I will take no more than 30% of your income, and I will absolutely regulate the rape and murder, which will absolutely
That's really all we need is a regulation on rape and murder. If only we made them illegal, maybe they would stop.
Let's regulate.
But the problem is rape and murder are not illegal.
So let me ask you, have you ever heard of the Taliban?
You're a fucking Machiavelli, you motherfucker.
Oh, is that my name? I have jokes. They're stupid jokes, but I have jokes.
Well, if you enjoy those stupid jokes, then make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and leave us a 5-star review. Check us out on YouTube and Rumble. Make sure that you like, comment, share. Definitely share, because if you share this podcast...
It's the best thing you can do for us.
If you share this podcast and you're thinking of somebody like, oh, this person might like this, then they'll be more incentivized to subscribe, maybe like, and that will help us out with the algorithm.
Even if you're dumb like me with social media, it'll take 35 seconds.
Yeah.
Probably not even that.
Please just give it a try. If you get frustrated, I get it, but give it a try.
And if you're on YouTube, make sure that you hit that notification bell. That way you always know when we post content. We're on social media. We're at Loud and Drunk on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you enjoyed this episode, then become a Loud and Drunk supporter. We're at loudanddrunk.locals.com and patreon.com/loudanddrunk. And make sure that you visit loudanddrunk.com. That is our home base. So if anything goes wrong on any of those platforms, you will never miss a moment. Make sure that you bookmark loudanddrunk.com.
Also, we got very cool merch. Check it out.
Yes. So for Justin Antonio Machiavelli.
Work makes you free.
God damn it.
Libertarian warlord.
Absolutely. I'm doing it for the people.
And Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us. And it was a wonderful conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. It was very enlightening. I really appreciate you being here.
Awesome.
I'm Dan, and until next time.
Now go home and smoke some more crack.
Amen.